Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Podcast Digest. This is Dan Lizette. This is episode 112. Very happy you came back to check out another great interview. Want to let you know that today's podcast is being brought to you by great supporters like yourself on the Patreon campaign, but also by Podbean, podcast hosting and monetization. It's the easiest way to start podcasting. If you go to podbean.com/TPD to learn more, you'll get 1 month free. Episode 112 is here, folks. Really excited about this one. I don't get to do this enough, and I've always said I wanted to do more of it, which is to shine a spotlight on a smaller, newer show that I think really will be exploding in the future and something you should be listening to right now. I get to do that this week. My guest is the host of a show called Crazy Good Turns. His name is Brad Shaw, and he's got an amazing story to tell with how this show got started, what its motivation was, and I love the subject matter in a world of so much negativity, especially in politics right now. This is a show nice and short that you can consume very quickly and get caught up on. Their season 1 that shines a light on people doing great things. They call them crazy good turns. And I talked with Brad a little bit after we recorded this interview, and he wanted me to make one mention, which is in this conversation, you will hear Brad talk about the upcoming season 2 of Crazy Good Turns. But in that conversation, he mentions that it will be sometime in the spring of 17, a little bit later than what it will actually be. He came back and told me, hey, guess what? We're going to actually end up having season 2 ready to go a little bit sooner than anticipated. So when it's towards the end of the conversation, I believe that we start to talk about seasons and when season 1 will wrap, when season 2 will be coming. But I wanted to let you know that Brad did say that season 2 will actually be launching January 10th of 2017. So not long at all. Not long at all. Jump on this bandwagon, folks. I think Brad's a super cool guy, and the team he's assembled there and doing the wonderful things they're doing with this show are definitely worth your time. So let's hop right to it, folks. Let's get to my conversation with the host of Crazy Good Turns, Brad Shaw. All right, folks, welcome back to the Podcast Digest. As I mentioned up front, I'm very excited to tell you guys all about my guest this week and a show that you may not have heard of, you may not have subscribed to yet, but I fully think that you should check it out. My guest this week is Brad Shaw. He is the host of a show called Crazy Good Turns, and it's something that's, I think, very unique in the iTunes library right now. So, Brad, welcome to the Podcast Digest.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you, and I found your show, and I want to just tell a quick story before we get into this on how I came across your show, because I want folks to understand this. About 4 weeks ago, 3 to 4 weeks ago, I had a guest on my show by the name of Dave Lee. He's one of the co-founders of International Podcast Day. And that day, September 30th, every year is a day where all the podcasters kind of hit the web and they do something to talk about podcasting, their shows, share it with people, so on and so forth. And I was all over social media that day. During that day, using that hashtag, I came across this show, and it caught my attention in what they were doing, and then I started listening, and I immediately fell in love and reached out to them so that I could talk to somebody. So that's why you guys are now hearing from Brad. So that's my little story, Brad.
Very cool. That's awesome.
And before we jump into Crazy Good Turns and the show itself, because there's tons of stuff I want to ask you about it, I'd like folks, as always, to get to know the hosts a little bit more. So can you tell folks a little bit about yourself personally, way before Crazy Good Turns?
Like how way before? You know, not birth, right?
I don't know. Where are you from? What'd you grow up? What'd you think you'd be doing? What's your previous resume? So on and so forth.
Sure. Happy to. I grew up in the South in Virginia, North Carolina. Went to school in Virginia and graduated with a journalism degree in the late 80s, and immediately moved to New York City, where I started a career in communications and public relations. And I bounced around to a couple agencies at first, ended up working for Pepsi, then Gateway, the computer company out west, and then was recruited in 2004 to come and head corporate communications for Home Depot, which I did for 11 years. And it was an incredible journey. It was a ton of fun. I was exposed to some amazing business minds and really great reporters and media outlets. And so communications and storytelling has sort of been in my blood since I was a kid. And that's what makes Crazy Good Turns so fun.
All right, let me take a quick aside here.
Sure.
Virginia. Where in Virginia are we talking, Brad?
Virginia Beach.
You're kidding me, Brad. I spent 20 years growing up in Virginia Beach.
Get out of here. Really?
Literally,
How
folks,
old
this
are
was
you?
not planned. This was brand new. I am a graduate of Princess Anne High School.
I'm Kempsville, my brother.
Ah.
Rivals. We were rivals.
Yeah, I just recently got up here. I'm now located, as most listeners know, on the outskirts of Philadelphia. Came up here about 3.5 years ago for a day job promotion, but I was working and living at the time in Chesapeake.
Oh, wow. That's great. Well, my whole family's still back in Virginia in Suffolk right now. And my brother lives in Richmond, too. So I still have roots there.
Yep, I got a brother in Virginia Beach and a mother in Williamsburg. So
that's awesome.
All right. Well, see, small world, folks, right? There's a connection everywhere. So, I'm glad you mentioned Home Depot because I was doing a little bit of research, and that you guys and the team, as we're going to talk about, are so new to the podcasting space. Research was a little tough because you guys are so new. But I did see the Huffington Post interview with you and your producer, Frank, that I understand Home Depot and your roles there kind of were somewhat of a launching pad into Crazy Good Turns. Tell me about that process.
Sure. No, that's exactly right. So my boss was Frank Blake, who was the CEO at the time that I retired in 2015. Actually, technically, he retired just before I did. And we were both fortunate to do so, given how well the company performed over the course of our careers there. And Frank and I stayed in close touch. And one day over coffee, and I remember it vividly, it was November of 2015. And I want to talk a lot about Frank because he's just an amazing leader and storyteller and communicator. But he said something really interesting to me. He said, put aside all the business stuff that we had to handle at Home Depot. When you really boil down what the core of our success was, it was that we told great stories. We told stories that motivated 500,000 employees to be inspired by the culture in the company. We told stories to Wall Street to get them confident in our future plans and invest in us. We told stories to the media to gain their interest and compel them to cover us. And he said, you know what? Now that we're out of the corporate world, why don't we figure out a way to tell stories for the greater good? And we kicked around some things, and he actually said he was really in the podcast at the time, and I was just starting to get into him. And he said, we need to launch a podcast, and we need to focus on nonprofits. And that's how the whole idea came about. It's
a tremendous idea, and I want to talk more about the premise in a minute. But
sure.
How do two guys who are living in high positions, if you will, at a large American corporation transition from that business world to podcast hosts and producers? How did you guys even start this journey?
It's pretty wild. I mean, Frank, we kicked around the idea just over the course of that first meeting, and this isn't a precise answer to your question, but I'll get there. But he basically, what we said was we want to tell a narrative tale, not just the background on a nonprofit or how it was created, how it's doing, how to run a nonprofit, because there was some of that already out there. We did some quick research, but we sort of looked at podcasts in general and started doing a little research and thought, wow, we can actually do this. The barrier to entry is pretty low. If we invest in this, we can actually create a product that's pretty high quality too, from just a narrative and sonic standpoint and from a music scoring standpoint, which is what we set out to do. And so, I don't want to make it sound like creating a podcast is easy, but certainly just based on everything we've done in the business world, we did some harder things, that's for sure. I mean, Home Depot was one of the biggest turnaround stories in retail in the past 15 years. And so we knew that if we could assemble the right team of people who actually knew what they were doing, unlike Frank and me, we'd actually have a shot at it. And that's kind of how it came about.
So, another quick aside, and folks, as always, all the links will be in the show notes as well as on the websites. But crazygoodturns.org is the home for the podcast. And I see a orange and white theme here. Can we associate this with the Home Depot prior experience, or is it just coincidence?
It is coincidence, but it certainly dawned on us at a couple stops along the way that people would ask us that. But it was purely coincidental.
Really good. The website's great, by the way. I should add that in, folks. The artwork is amazing, which I want to ask you about, but it reminds me of it's just so fitting that it's it's so, I don't know if down to earth's the right word or real, because so many of the stories that you guys have told, and folks, at the time of this recording, we are 6 episodes in to Crazy Good Turns, but it's a great website with a wonderful sense of style, if you will. So my compliments to the the web developers that you guys assembled.
No, thanks. We used a little boutique shop here in town called Office of Brothers in a sort of funky enclave of Atlanta called Cabbage Town, and they literally work out of an old house down there. And most of their work is in the restaurant industry, interestingly, here in Atlanta, although they've done some fashion work too, but really, really helpful along the way, sort of iterating with us on what we wanted the whole design ethos to be. So we're happy with how it came out, and I appreciate the compliment.
So I want to dig in a bit into the name of the show and the premise, because I think it's wildly unique. And honestly, with the hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of tweets that were jumping around on September 30th for International Podcast Day, I think it was the name that jumped out to me. So is there a little backstory to the premise and the name specifically?
Well, yeah. So I'll start with the premise, which is it's pretty simple. We want to tell stories about people who do amazing things for others. And that has largely fallen into the nonprofit category for now, but we do have an episode coming up in a couple weeks where it's more of an individual, but who's organized some pretty interesting activity that we can talk about. But it's really meant to just celebrate people who do good things. And frankly, in today's world, there's not much of that going on. I mean, it's become okay to tear each other down and apart, and we want to make sure it's still okay to build each other up and inspire people to hopefully do other good things for other people. And so that was really the premise of it. And I would say also that when you think about nonprofits, and when I was at Home Depot, part of my job was running all of our corporate giving and philanthropy and volunteer work. So I got to know a lot of nonprofits, sat on quite a few boards. They are great at doing good things, but not so great in general. This is a general comment at telling their own story. They're not great marketers typically. There are a handful that are, and they're big brands as a result, but particularly your smaller startup nonprofits really have a tough time getting the word out about what they do. So we also looked at it as a service to people doing good things to kind of help them tell their story better than they might have otherwise. You want me to segue to the name now?
Please.
So with the Office of Brothers, we basically gave them the task early on of, okay, we've got our working title was the nonprofit, which none of us liked, but it was just what we called it right out of the box. And we said we need a new name. We need a logo. We need, again, that sort of design ethos. So we worked with them for a number of weeks. They came up with literally probably 50 or 60 different names across the board, and 5 or 6 different look and feel concepts for the design itself. And we honed in on probably 3 or 4, and this is actually a kind of funny story. I remember we winnowed down the 4 or 5, and I sent them to Frank and said, what do you think? And one of them was a good turn. By the way, another one was big giant hug. We had another one that was just the porch, because that's a great place to sit back and rock and tell stories, which we were obviously going to do. But
yeah,
when I sent him to Frank, he sent a note back and he gave me his reasons for not liking some of them, but really honed in on a good turn. And it's funny, he said, first of all, it needs to be plural, something good turns, but we need a modifier in front of that. And he said, now I'm from Boston and I would lean toward wicked good turns, but that's probably not going to play well outside of Boston, so let's come up with something else. So, and we all laughed at that. And it's funny because when we were going through the naming process, we kept landing on the word crazy in some of the descriptors, because in some of the early episodes we had created at that point, And again, they were pretty rough because we didn't have a title or name. We really liked it, and we proposed that to Frank, and we all just fell in love with it. And what I like about it is it really conveys a few different meanings that are relevant to the podcast. First of all, you've heard this, Dan. Some, if not most, of the people we feature are kind of crazy. One of the guys, Bruce Deal, who runs City of Refuge, literally picked his wife and 5 kids up out of a comfortable suburban neighborhood and parachuted them into the most dangerous, crime-ridden neighborhood in Atlanta and lived in a church to help the broken population there. And had his car broken into, car stolen. I had to chase people down the street with a baseball bat in his underwear. I mean, he's crazy. And so the people are crazy to think that they can change the world or do something as good as they are, but are stubborn enough to do it. And that's one element of it, but then it's crazy good stuff that they're doing too. And they're doing crazy good turns for other people. And so it really resonated with us. Frankly, we were a little concerned that most people would scratch their heads and say, what the heck is this? But it seems to have kind of caught on a bit.
I think it's absolutely perfect. And it's one of those ones where it's like, now having listened to the library so far, these 6 episodes, I can't imagine another name. Like it's totally fitting, and I just want to hop back to a second to the premise because, and I think you made a comment earlier, Brad, to this fact as well, is that not only is there not enough celebration of the good deeds in the world, it's certainly the case, I think, in podcasts as well. Whether it be your local news, the cable news, stories that are written up or shared across the internet, what all the eyeballs or earballs tend to gravitate towards are those salacious stories that involve drama or conflict or what have you. And that's fine and good and what have you, but it's completely outweighs the underserved idea of all the good things that happened, and those good things exist. And what's funny is because I'm constantly reminding people of those type of things, and it's great. There is a couple other shows out there that I think do something similar from the idea of shining a light on those under-messaged missions, if you will, of good things. But the angle that you guys are taking on it, I think, is spectacular, and it's such a change of pace, if you will, and it's a great listen and a great message, and I think you guys are doing a great job with it.
Well, thank you, and that was our goal, and it's come together in a way that we're all really pleased with, and let's hope it keeps growing.
That's for sure. So let's get to some of those episodes. You mentioned episode 2 a little bit, and I want to kind of jump in on some of these. So I'm curious. So between you and Frank and the team, and I want to talk about some of the other team members as well, but and maybe you can wind some of them into this story. Sure. You guys have this idea, right? And you now have a name, and you started production on a few episodes you mentioned already. How do you guys, again, without the background in audio or podcast production, I know you mentioned journalism and communications were something you had a hand in, but how do you guys start finding these stories, finding the people to interview, starting the production process? What were those early days like?
Well, it's a great question, Dan, and it's an interesting story in itself. So, again, as I mentioned, I ran our corporate giving at Home Depot, so I had contacts with a number of nonprofits, 4 of which are in those first 6 episodes. So City of Refuge, I knew Bruce Deal pretty well. Not pretty well, but just knew him personally. Had toured his facility and got to know his story. Team Rubicon was one that Home Depot was one of their biggest funders while I was there. Kaboom, I was on the board of for a while. And then Tunnel to Towers was another big funding recipient from Home Depot. So those first 6, 4 I knew pretty well. So it was easy to say, I know them and I know they have a great story. What we did before we even had the Crazy Good Turns name was I said to Frank, let me assemble the team, put a budget together, and go record a pilot episode to see if this concept even flies. So I did just that. We found a great audio engineer who's here in the room with me now, Stephen Key. We found this the design shop I mentioned, the Office of Brothers, and a great writing colleague that they have there who helps co-write the episodes with me. And then we have Megan Basinger, who's our project manager. She worked for me at Home Depot and left shortly around the time I did, after the time I did, to have a baby, and is now sort of working on a couple other projects, but is really integral to keeping the trains moving on time here at Crazy Good Turns. And then finally, one of the other interesting things, again, this is Frank's influence, who's a huge music fan, as am I. We're both deep into all kinds of music catalogs. He said, you know what, let's figure out a way to make it a vehicle for music discovery as well. So let's get real bands playing real music and not just have the violins and xylophones that so many other podcasts have as background music and segues. So I sniffed around with some friends out in L.A. who were in video production, and they recommended a group called Score a Score, who does all of our music scoring for us. And they have connections with all kinds of emerging artists across all genres. And we were able, with our lawyers, to create a way to basically have them waive their music rights for us for the course of the podcast, so that we can now use original music in the episodes itself too. So before I could get all the music sorted out, I went to Bruce Deal, had a conversation with him, explained the concept. We did an interview and cut a rough pilot, and then went back to Frank and said, okay, here's the rough pilot, give it a listen, and then here's what it would cost for us in season 1 to get this off the ground with this great team of people we had built. And he immediately gave it the green light. It's actually funded by his family foundation. We are a nonprofit ourselves. We're part of a philanthropic arm of his called Joyful Noise Productions, and that's a nonprofit as well. So we don't sell ads. We're not making money. I volunteer all my time. And as I said, it's a nonprofit funded by Frank's foundation, and that was the early start of it. So the City of Refuge episode was really interesting and strong right out of the box, but the early pilot is very different from what you hear now. Different music, etc.
Was the early pilot ultimately turned into one of these episodes, or no?
Yep. It was, I believe, episode 2. That's the City of Refuge episode.
I'm sorry. Okay, so the City of Refuge turned into the was the pilot, was the base for the pilot. Gotcha.
That's right. But once we got the name and the music locked in, we went in and recut the whole thing. So it's pretty different from the rough one we started with.
All right, and you mentioned the music usage, and I think the music usage is one of the most unique things about Crazy Good Turns, because it's not your melodramatic, instrumental, low-volume background or maybe something atmospheric that you tend to hear in many other shows, and a lot of those shows do that well, but you guys have a very different approach, which is sort of, as you were describing, full track, band music discovery type thing. And I think that's a really unique play. What's the process like of selecting music for some of these stories?
Oh, it's actually a pretty interesting process. So when we can get into more depth on the actual creative process as well, but the way that part of the music works is we basically send them just the scripted audio version of a specific episode with no music. And when I say them, it's Score, the firm that I mentioned earlier. And then they get back to us with recommendations for various parts of the episode itself. So they'll say, here are 3 options for the open, 4 different options for some of the middle bridges, and here's a couple options for the close. I give them a listen, get back to them with my thoughts, and then they cut it with, mix it with those options that we select. So that's how it works. And then we sign all the waivers with the bands. The other thing we do is feature each soundtrack from each episode as a Spotify playlist on our website. And we make sure we give a shout out that you probably heard some great bands on this episode. Check them out on our website. So we're trying to drive traffic to the bands too.
It seems to me, Brad, that I can't help but think this. I keep coming back to this, and I do want to talk more about sort of the narrative and the story and the through line on some of these episodes. But before I get into that, it really feels like you guys have a super good idea about what you're doing, but I know that there's, very little experience in this particular medium. I mean, some of these are very educated, considered decisions. Did you guys just sort of fall into this, or was there like a ton of research, or how did you guys come to things like the music being an important component, or utilizing, the service that you mentioned? How does one kind of settle on some of these great decisions you guys have made?
I wish I had an easy answer for that, Dan, but I really don't. I mean, it was, but there's an interesting consideration there that we should talk about, because, one of the discussions that we had quite often was, as we were developing the pilot and sharing it with people, we got some feedback, and, some of it was helpful. A lot of it was interesting, quite a bit irrelevant, because what I was pretty clear with telling the team when we get some feedback was, listen, guys, just because we're getting feedback doesn't mean we need to listen to it. And just because we're doing something that hasn't been done before, make it bad. And so literally we had some people say, wow, the music's kind of distracting. And my opinion was, well, then don't listen to it. It's fine. I mean, we basically said we need to set out with our own vision of what this needs to be. Sure, we'll take feedback when there are things that just don't work, and there were a couple of those. But we really just need to articulate our own vision and then execute against it. And if it develops an audience, great. If not, we're still doing something good for nonprofits and the people who do listen.
I don't think the music's distracting. I think maybe on the first episode or two, I noticed it a bit more, but now it's sort of fit into the thematic element of Crazy Good Turns, if you will. And so now it would feel weird without it, now if you ask me.
Right, no, it's a great point. And that's one of the other points I made to the team is, over time, we'll condition listeners to think differently about our podcast, and they'll get used to some of the things we're doing that maybe others aren't. And so, I think that as we develop a fan base and people listen to it repeatedly, they'll start getting used to those things, as you say.
Hey, folks, let me interrupt just for a quick moment this conversation with Brad from Crazy Good Turns to tell you about this week's show sponsor. It is Podbean. Folks, I've been telling you about Podbean, and I hope you've checked it out. If not, you really should. If you're a podcaster already, or you're an avid listener thinking about starting your own show, you definitely should. And if you decide to, I strongly encourage you to check out Podbean as a great hosting service, right? Podbean specializes in hosting and monetization. You're going to get so many great features with Podbean, including awesome mobile applications for both Android and iOS, comprehensive podcast stats. You'll realize as soon as you start a show how important statistics are. You're going to get a great website. It's very much like a blog, easy to use, customizable themes and colors available. You're going to be able to share the show easily with automatic social sharing and some quality embeddable players for your show. If you already have a website, Podbean can integrate with that too. Of course, RSS and iTunes support, obviously very important when you launch a show, so you can import and redirect supported if you are migrating an existing show over. They've got an online directory, all kinds of promotional opportunities, including integrated monetization tools, guys. You can set up your show to have premium content. It's an advertising platform. They've got a patron program, all kinds of great stuff with Podbean that you should be checking out if you already have a show or consider starting one. And better yet, if you go to podbean.com/TPD for the podcast digest, TPD, you can learn more about what I'm talking about here and also get your first month free. So it's a great deal, folks. It's worth at least your research, and I hope you go ahead and check them out. Let's get back to the show. So let's talk about some of the decisions that go into each one of these episodes, the sort of creative or story-based decisions. We talked about, your experience with some of the nonprofit kind of creating the base for some of the guests and some of the stories, but obviously, as I've talked to so many hosts at this point, I know that there is probably, 10, 20, 30x amount of recording that goes into one of these creations. So talk to us about sort of, you've identified a particular organization or a person, and then what's next? Do you hop out to their place with a recorder, and then what next? How does this all work?
Great question. And it's interesting. So we have a saying among the team here that all nonprofits, or at least most, by definition, do good things. Not all of them have great stories, though. And particularly when you think about some of the bigger monolithic nonprofits that we all know and love so well, they're sort of past their startup story and the real interesting backstory element of it. And so for us, once we hear about a nonprofit that we think has a good story, we actually dig into that a bit to confirm that. So we might do, in fact, we typically do an sort of a pre-interview with the principal interview subject just to get some background on what that backstory is. Also make sure they're articulate and would be a worthy interview subject. And then just do a ton of our own research to try to pull out those narrative threads to build that arc within the context of the interview we do. So we have a rule that when we interview a primary subject, it's always got to be in person. We just feel that a sort of face-to-face conversation is going to draw out a lot more color and emotion, and it allows us to take some left and right turns in the questioning too that we might not be able to otherwise, because it's just a more comfortable setting. So in some cases, people have flown here to Atlanta, and others I've flown to them. I've been to LA. That's where we did the Trevor Project, which just launched yesterday, actually. We also did Team Rubicon out there because they're based in LA. I was just out in Las Vegas recording an upcoming episode in a couple weeks. So that's, we prefer to be in person because, again, we think it's just a better atmosphere and environment for driving a good interview. And so the interview itself would usually last about an hour. And then we typically like to get a sort of secondary subject. Maybe it's someone who's been helped by the nonprofit or someone who has helped the nonprofit or just some other tangential connection to it. And then that sort of builds the entire story for us. And that's the process.
And then you bring all these SD cards back to the office. And what happens next?
I don't do any of that. Steven brings all the whatever they are back to the office. We ship them off to somewhere overseas. Megan handles that process, and we get the transcripts back. And then what we've done with some of these first few episodes, in fact, all of them, is a writer that's on the team takes the first crack at the script, sends me a draft, and because I like writing as well and editing, I usually edit, and there's a varying percentage of editing that takes place per episode. I want to put some things in my words, obviously, and my syntax, so there's a lot of that. And then sometimes because I'm the one doing the primary research, I might have a piece of information or a perspective about that nonprofit that our writer might not, although he does a great job in research as well. And then I come in with Steven, and we record the voiceover, and he blends the whole thing together, and that's what we send out to Score in LA.
Have you guys talked about or had discussions about, recent guest, and I believe you told me you listened to this episode, Glenn Washington from Snap Judgment, talks a lot about, if anybody's listened to Snap Judgment, and I imagine at this point most people have, he always opens every episode with sort of a personal story, and he verified for me that they were all true and so on and so forth. But he's obviously making calculated decisions about his opening segment or narration or however you want to label it. I'm curious about when you talk about you're the one kind of performing the interviews and going out to these locations, on how much of your own personal narrative should or could get interwoven throughout the episode?
I would say little to none. I mean, and when I look back at the first 8 episodes we've produced, and there's an intentional reason for that, which I'll get into, but I sort of opine about Bruce Deal in the City of Refuge episode just because I think he's such an interesting study in contrast. And so it's not really an opinion, it's just an observation. That's the only time I've really offered any kind of sort of personal perspective, except also in the Kaboom episode. I just said, for full disclosure, I was on Kaboom's board for a while and know Darrell Hammond, the founder, really well. But the reason I don't and we don't is because it's not about us. I mean, this is about everyone else and people who do amazing things for other people. And we've actually gotten some good feedback from people who have listened saying we do a respectful job of letting people tell their own story, but still kind of ticking the narrative along where we need to with a voiceover that doesn't get in the way. And that's really the intentional element of it, that we want to just back off and let the story tell itself, because quite frankly, they really do. I mean, a great story will tell itself.
Absolutely. And that's the case. You mentioned Kaboom. maybe my favorite. I don't know. Maybe that's just something about playgrounds that kind of connects with me. I don't know, but I really enjoyed that episode, and I thought it was spectacular. And you know what? Let me just say this as well. And I think it was the premise for this question, Brad, was that in that there's about a 2-minute segment, give or take or so, where you and the name escapes me. It's not in front of me at this point.
Daryl Hammond.
Right. Talk about how you guys both worked on a particular playground, and there's something that really connects about the idea of your voice doing the narration, but also having such a personal connection to a particular group that I think really shone through in that episode. And I think that's why I asked that in terms of your own take or perspective being interwoven into the narrative.
No, and that's a fair point. And again, that's a unique one because I was on the Kaboom board for a number of years, literally built probably 100 playgrounds with Daryl across the country, including in the Gulf region after Katrina. But, again, these people have done amazing things and have incredible stories to tell. And anything I can do or say just pales in comparison. It really does.
I understand.
It's just, my opinion really shouldn't matter when I'm talking to someone like, Jake at Team Rubicon. I mean, what he has done is just incredible. And I'd prefer to just give them the space. And look, I get that a lot of podcasts are people opining and talking about things and providing their opinion, and that's cool. And I like some of those, but that just wasn't our intent here.
No, and I think it's executed beautifully as well. There's and it makes me think that when or if that's there, that it now lets me know that it's substantial and relevant should that personal commentary come in. And I think that will only add levity to these, what sounds like will be very rare occasions when you do so.
Well, there is a reference in one called Magic Wheelchair coming up where I demonstrate what little I know about pop culture. So you will get that.
Wonderful. I want to talk about a couple other topics here regarding where you guys are going. You mentioned 8 seasons. Is our first season 8 episodes?
Yes. No. First season is 10 episodes.
10. Okay.
And so we've got 8 fully recorded, 6 launched, 2 more to come, and then 2 more that we're currently in the process of recording. And
I just noted.
Go ahead.
I just noticed on the website October 25th is episode 7, yes?
That's correct.
So for folks listening right now, that is coming in the upcoming, about a week or so, I guess now.
A couple weeks, yeah. And that's Magic Wheelchair, which is a really great episode, I think. I mean, it was just Ryan, the founder, has an amazing story, and the work they're doing is really cool. And they're getting help from a great special effects school out in Hollywood called the Stan Winston School. And so there's just a lot of really interesting threads going through that one.
Is it too early to talk about, Brad, or are we already safe to assume that we will see an episode or season 2?
Absolutely. No, in fact, Frank and I were together today, and we were talking about season 2. We've already said we're going to do at least 15 episodes. We have 2 already in the pipeline. We're trying to figure out when we launch season 2, probably sometime in the early spring. It took us a while to get up and running with season 1, so we launched in August, which is kind of a weird time to launch. But we're looking at sometime in March or April getting back on the air.
So as you guys are approaching the finish line of season 1, talking already, as you mentioned, you're meeting today about season 2. Anything you guys have sort of learned so far, taken away, maybe things you do different, things you do more of, less of, any lessons learned so far?
I guess I'd start by saying, we really appreciate the kind of feedback that folks like you are giving us and others. I would also put in that category the feedback we've gotten from the nonprofits themselves. Almost to a person, they've sent us a note after. And I think this has been probably one of the most fulfilling and gratifying parts of this whole journey. And they tell us literally in some variation of this thought, thank you so much. No one has ever told our story as beautifully and as gracefully as this. And again, that's not me. That's a team effort of a whole bunch of people working hard to make that happen. But to hear that is really gratifying. So the product itself, we're really happy with. I'd say for us, and one of the things Frank and I were talking about today is that it's really just a matter of awareness and visibility and distribution and just getting the word out. I don't know that we tweak the product too much. We're looking at a possible little addition to it from a submission standpoint, where we might cast an even broader net for just individuals who have done really cool things, and maybe give them a shout out on the episode itself. But we're pretty happy with where we're heading right now. The challenge for us is going to be continuing to find great nonprofits with equally great backstories. And like I said, we're starting to get some submissions on our website now, and in fact, one of the final episodes of this season came in through our website, and 2 that we're looking at for next season did as well. So at least people are now starting to engage and send us some ideas, which is what the hope was.
So if folks start listening to Crazy Good Turns and they work with, know of, have benefited from, what have you, a local organization or person that's doing something awesome, they should go to crazygoodturns.org and tell you guys about it, yes?
Absolutely. It's on our landing page, and it says, tell us a story, right below the fold, I think. And then, likewise, if you're a band who has a great song that you think should be featured, send us that too, and the guys at Score help us vet those. We've gotten a number of submissions from bands as well.
Excellent. So what has you mentioned some of the feedback coming from some of the nonprofits you've already featured. What about listeners in general? Have you heard some feedback from subscribers and listeners?
Yeah, it's funny. And again, I mean, it's early. We're little. So it's not like we have a million downloads. So,
right.
Frank.
That's okay, Brad. Neither do I. It's fine.
But trust me, I'm looking at that damn Libsyn dashboard every day repeatedly. But it's funny because Frank said to me today, we were talking about our only issue being distribution and visibility, because he said, I've literally shared this with everyone I know, and no one has had anything but good things to say. So it's just one of those things where we know it's a slow build. It's going to take a while. So that's, it's been nothing but positive, to be honest with you. It's been really just gratifying.
And that kind of goes into my next question, Brad. What are your thoughts personally, or the group's thoughts, if you can represent those or feel comfortable doing so, on any association that could assist distribution, like something like becoming part of a network?
We'd love it. We just don't think we're big enough. Frank, I mean, look, I'll be full disclosure on this. We had to learn all this stuff along the way. I mean, it's been just a ton of research just trying to figure stuff out, because frankly, no member of the team had really been too deep into podcasting. I mean, Steven, our audio guy, clearly knows the technical aspects of it, but I mean, we had to learn what the heck Libsyn even was. So,
right.
It's that part of it's been kind of tough.
Well, I what reminds me of, and I feel comfortable enough because I know these guys, and I'm going to go ahead and say it, only because I feel like I can see a home for this with you guys. And it's not necessarily a monetization play, but I know that's not a thing for you guys anyways, so that's okay. But the Herd. The Herd is a collective, basically, of a bunch of regional podcasts that do nothing other than support each other and help cross-promote and what have you. It's theherdradio.com. I've had, 75% of this collective on my podcast before. I know the guy who found it, but this is Neighbors from Nashville Public Radio, Nocturne, How to Be a Girl, Anxious Machine, First Day Back, Arrivals, Rumble Strip Vermont was a recent addition, and I know many of these people. They're a great group of people, and I could really see Crazy Good Turns finding a really super comfy home awesome. With the Herd. But that's just me being an observer.
Well, we'd love a home, and I would say, the little research we've done just says we need more scale. But if you or any of your listeners out there can hook us up in any way, we would deeply appreciate it. We would love a nice, comfy home.
Yeah, well, of course, Radiotopia would be great, right? Or Gimlet. Yeah. But, these are, although Radiotopia, I've had, 80% of that network. Julie Shapiro, the executive producer, was my recent guest. So anything's possible, right? All I know is that, whether you guys ever end up joining a collective or network or not, is that I would encourage as many people as possible to check it out, because it's that breath of fresh air in your earbuds with content that you don't normally hear, and I think it's an amazing listen. And my compliments to you and that full team for what you guys are doing.
Well, no, and let me just be clear also, Dan, that we are by no means averse to joining a network. It's just it was kind of at the bottom of our list. The first was creating just a great product that people would appreciate,
right,
and then figuring out how to basically get it out there. So, now that we're up and running, we would love, further distribution. That's for sure.
And I've got to ask this question because somebody might be wondering, right? You mentioned sort of the origins and backstory, and if you don't want to answer this is completely fine, Brad. But we talked about network or collective eventual, alliance there. But what about monetization? You mentioned there are no ads. Is that something even on the radar, or not even a topic at this point?
It's funny. The original model that we built said, why don't we propose selling ads, stay a nonprofit, but basically what the model was going to be, that any ad revenue would basically fund production, and then anything over that would basically go back to the nonprofits that we're featuring. We're just not big enough to sell ads now, but we wouldn't rule it out. We wouldn't rule it out for that reason precisely, because, again, Frank's funding this from his family foundation standpoint. If there were other ways that we could fund the production and then actually do some good for the nonprofits themselves through that effort by selling ads, then that's absolutely something we'd at least consider. I mean, I'm not saying we definitely would, but we would absolutely consider.
That sounds spectacular. After costs are covered, then everything goes back into the organizations. That would be even, sort of next level, if you will, in terms of sort of what you guys' mission are in terms of not only just shining a light on some of these great folks and organizations, but also helping them directly. That would be amazing for sure.
Well, no, that's right. And you can imagine the flywheel effect of just listeners sharing, because the more listeners we get, the more revenue we drive, and the more goes back to the nonprofit. So that whole sort of virtuous circle that, would continue to help is just a pretty cool thought. So we're not there yet. We're not sure we will, but it's certainly something we've talked about from the start.
I want you to take a minute, if you can, or if you'd like. You mentioned Frank's family's nonprofit. That's Joyful Noise Productions?
That's right, and that's really part of his family foundation, which is focused on many other things. But this in particular was one of the first projects.
Well, if you can share, what is his foundation involved with?
We were actually meeting on that today. We're in the early stages. I'm working with Frank again because of my role at Home Depot in terms of our philanthropic efforts. We're looking at, I don't want to get into too much specificity here at this point because it's still early stage, but we're looking at some interesting things here in Atlanta, but also beyond. So it's a little early to talk about that at this point.
All right. So it's a soon to be launched venture, not a pre-established thing, basically.
Yeah, it's established, but we're still together working through the focus areas beyond Joyful Noise and Crazy Good Turns. But there will be others. Trust me, we had a long conversation about it today.
Marvelous. That sounds great. It sounds like exciting. Maybe, in season 8 of Crazy Good Turns, maybe Frank should be an interview for you, Brad.
Absolutely. No, look at his backstory. I mean, he's a pretty interesting cat when you think he, is the CEO of an $80 billion company, and now he's executive producer of a podcast. It's pretty interesting.
It's a brilliant story. And I'm telling you, I've been looking at the website this whole time, Brad, and I'm sorry, I got to come back to one of my first comments. You keep saying Home Depot, and I keep seeing orange and white on the website, and the connection is so strong. I'm telling you.
I think it's a different color. It's a different, whatever it is, the Pantone.
Oh, it's a different shade of orange.
Yeah, I don't think it's exactly the Home Depot orange.
See, only you guys would be able to recognize that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't. We'd probably. I don't even think we could use the Home Depot color. I'm sure it's
Well, marvelous. Well, I really appreciate you guys sharing sort of the story of Crazy Good Turns. And it's funny, it's like you guys tell the story of all the nonprofits, and now we're telling the story of Crazy Good Turns. And I think it's a great one. I'm super excited about the future of the show and what you guys have going. If anyone wants to know more about this, Brad, where can they find all the stuff about it?
Well, obviously on iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play, and in terms of the episodes themselves, but crazygoodturns.org is our website, and we have all of our current episodes there. We've got some cool merch too, by the way. So, if you're looking for a T-shirt or a hat, definitely a cool place to go, and a great coffee mug, by the way. It's sort of a World War II era ceramic mug that's just really cool. So anyway, enough of the plugging. I would just say also, Dan, thank you so much for the attention and for the time and the interest in us. As I said repeatedly, we're still little and still trying to grow. And so whenever we can have an opportunity like this to talk with someone like you, we deeply appreciate it.
Well, I've said a bunch. I think what you guys are doing is great, and I think it should have more attention. And even if a handful of listeners hop over and subscribe and check this out, folks, I think it's plenty worth your time and effort. These are not long episodes, right? I mean, you guys are clocking in 15, 18, 20 minutes, give or take, on average so far?
Yeah, that's right. Our target was 20, and that was simply personal preference with Frank and I. We both said, let's just make these a sort of short burst listen as opposed to anything too long. It's funny because that was Frank's speaking style when he was CEO as well. I mean, he generally didn't like to talk for more than 20 minutes, so it's sort of in his DNA as well.
So it's perfect, folks. Easy to hop on the train right now. Only 6 episodes in the back catalog. You can be caught up this morning, this afternoon, this evening. You can be done by the end of the day and get on for episode 7 upcoming in the rest of season 1 and season 2 to follow. And I strongly encourage you. I know I'm staying subscribed. I will be checking this out as well. And if you know any bands or you know any great folks doing work out there, make sure you guys get in touch via the links in the show notes.
Awesome. Thanks again, Dan.
And there you have it, folks. That's episode 112 of the Podcast Digest featuring Mr. Brad Shaw from Crazy Good Turns. Hope you guys enjoyed a little bit of behind-the-scenes info on how that show gets started. And don't forget, there's season 2 coming early. It'll be here in the early part of January of 2017. So subscribe and check it out. And want to let you guys know as well, if you missed it earlier, Podbean is this week's show sponsor. Don't forget to check out podbean.com/TPD if you're thinking of starting a podcast or looking for a great home for your existing show. You'll get that first month free if you sign up with that special URL so you can try all of Podbean's great hosting features. My thanks to Podbean for supporting the Podcast Digest and for you for listening. And if you love this show, you love what I'm doing, check out the Patreon campaign. That link's in the show notes if you want to make sure this show goes further and further and higher. Tell a friend, leave a review on iTunes. I appreciate all of it, folks. Until next week, my name's Dan Lizette for the Podcast Digest.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter @PodDigest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.